All right, here we're going to be talking about substitution. So substitution is essentially using order of operations to simplify or evaluate an expression. You definitely learned about that last year. You probably heard the acronym PEMDAS or GEMDAS, where you follow each of those steps in order. Fortunately, this year we have access to Desmos, the entire unit, and we're really going to take advantage of that. As long as we know how to substitute these numbers into Desmos, really it's going to follow order of operations for us. So we're going to evaluate or simplify expressions. Basically, you're taking a big expression and turning it into just one number. We're simplifying it to find the value of that expression, given values for variables. The most important part of this is that we always use parentheses when we substitute a number in. So I'm going to show that. It's not the parentheses that are actually given in the expression. So actually in this first example, we have parentheses already in the expression. When we substitute each of these numbers in, they're each going to get their own set of parentheses. So I'm going to show that. I'm going to show the substitution step for each of these, and then I'm really just going to perform the evaluation in the calculator. So this says I have this expression when a is 9 and b is -4. So I'm going to take those numbers and substitute them in to that expression in parentheses. So 5 minus, then I have this open parentheses, that's just part of the problem, and then I'm going to have another set of parentheses right there. In place of that a, I'm putting in the number 9. So this number goes in place of a, and it gets its own set of parentheses when we type that into the calculator. Same thing for b, minus 6 times b. I'm going to put parentheses right around that -4. -4 goes in place of the b, and it gets its own set of parentheses. And then I continue writing the problem. We still have this end parentheses there, so I'm going to finish that with that second set of parentheses. Right, and now I'm really just going to perform that operation in the calculator. 5 minus, open up parentheses, open up another one, then put my 9 in there. I'm going to close that one, minus 6, open up the second set of parentheses for that -4, and then close it. And we find out that that is -28. So a lot of this is just understanding how to use the calculator so that it can help you follow order of operations. So this next one, we're using exponents here. So that's an exponent, that little 2, that's an exponent, that little 3. We're squaring this x, and we're cubing this entire expression. Every individual number that gets plugged in gets its own set of parentheses. So we're going to rewrite this expression exactly like we see it. Negative. We have an x there that we're taking this -10 and plugging it in. We're going to put parentheses just around the -10. The squared goes on the outside. That's really important. The number itself is the only thing in the parentheses. The -10 is in the parentheses. The squared is on the outside of that. Plus, open parentheses for this b plus b. So that's -2 plus another -2. And then we're cubing that entire expression. So we close that big parentheses and then put the cubed on the outside of that. So -10 in the parentheses with the squared on the outside, plus big parentheses opened, smaller parentheses for that -2, another set of parentheses for the second -2, close the big parentheses, and then put the cubed on the outside. So you could hit this button to cube it. You could hit this button to square it. I just use the shortcuts on my keyboard. I just don't want to lift my hands off the keyboard, so I would just hit Shift and 6 to use those exponents. However you type it, it should look exactly like the problem we set up here, and it should give us -164. All right, when we have a big division problem like this, it's really important that we set it up exactly like we see it, where this whole expression is on the bottom of that fraction. I'm going to show you how to do that when we get to the calculator part. For right now, I'm just going to substitute those numbers in. -2 goes in place of m, 3 goes in place of b. So -7 times m squared. So the -2 gets its own set of parentheses. Everything else is on the outside. The exponent is on the outside. The -7 sits on the outside of the parentheses. Just the -2 is in there. Minus 5 minus 3 squared. 3 gets its own set of parentheses, and then 2 times -2 on the bottom. Again, that -2 gets its own set of parentheses. So negative 7 times negative 2 squared minus, so I want to type 5 minus 3 squared. Oops, sorry. The squared should be on the outside of that parentheses. I run into a problem here, though. If I just type that division next, if I say divided by, it's only putting the 3 squared on top of that fraction. So I have to tell it that this whole thing, that whole expression, the 5 minus 3 squared, is on top of that fraction. So even though this is not written in the problem, the way Desmos understands this, if we put this in parentheses and then divide that whole expression, now it puts it on the top of the fraction, and I can type the 2 times negative 2 on the bottom. And we get negative 29. So this is a little bit weird. We have to actually add another set of parentheses here just to tell Desmos, put that on the top of the fraction. You can also use this button to set up the fraction before you start typing. Oops. All right, absolute value. Same idea. Every time we substitute in that x, we're still putting it in parentheses. Just want to show you how to use absolute value in the calculator. Negative 2 goes in parentheses. Absolute value of 2 squared minus 5 squared. Sometimes the parentheses matter more than others. Actually, this time, they're actually not going to impact the problem. But I just want you to do it every time just because we're not really sure every time if it is going to impact the problem. It's always important for negatives. So we are going to type negative 2 in parentheses and then an absolute value. I hit shift and the / to open up the absolute value. But you can also click on this function button and then hit this button for absolute value. I just think it's easier to use the keys that are on the keyboard. Now I'm going to type 2 in parentheses with the squared on the outside minus 5 squared. And then I'm going to close my absolute value. That gives me negative 42. I'd obviously rather you understand the steps of order of operations, but Desmos is so useful and we have access to it, so I'm just suggesting that we use it as much as we can. Kind of the same thing on this one. I'm just going to show you how to use the square root. I'm going to substitute that 2 in. We have negative 2 times the square root. Anytime we have a number just sitting up against another expression, that means we're multiplying there. Actually, let's say we had like 2 and then a 3, both in parentheses. That's just implying multiplication. 5 times 2 cubed minus 6 times 2 squared. All right, negative 2. You could type the square root button, and then it's automatically going to multiply these. 5 times 2. Oops, the 2 should get in parentheses. Next one on the outside. Oop, I wrote that wrong. Sorry, it was really a cube. I said it the right way, but I wrote that wrong. Minus 6 times 2 squared. That gives us negative 8. So this is what I really wrote wrong. This should be a 3 instead. So really this year, if you can use Desmos, you can master order of operations. You really don't even need to actually understand how all of these operations intersect. I'd like for you to understand that, but for right now we have access to this tool, so why not use it? All right, try the U-try problems on the right side before you move on to the back. Actually, I would get those checked before you move on to the back. Let me know if you need any help.